Africa's future must be shaped not only by its governments, but by its peoples, whom you all represent. We gather at a moment when events beyond our shores are having a profound and damaging impact on the lives of the people of our continent. Africa's story teaches us that division has long been the instrument through which others have sought to shape our destiny. A united Africa shapes its own destiny. History will judge us not by the speeches that we deliver, but by the Africa we build. The wars that are raging across the world are causing great instability and uncertainty. Our continent is also not spared the effects of conflict and instability. Greater global economic turbulence is caused by all these conflicts and the increasing geopolitical tension that is occurring across the world. Nor is our continent spared the devastating impact of accelerating climate change. In recent days, we have seen destructive fires raging across our sister countries of Africa, in Algeria, in Morocco, and Tunisia, resulting in the loss of many lives. We convey to these governments and the peoples of those affected countries our deepest sympathies for the loss of life, livelihoods, and properties. I think it will be proper for us to observe a moment of silence for those lives that are being lost at this point in time. Please, let us observe a moment of silence. Thank you. Now, these developments make it even more important that Africa should be able to stand together to advance its own development. Mr. President, we congratulate you and your 4 vice presidents on your successful election to lead the 7th legislature. We wish you well for your term of office. We are confident that you will, together with your colleagues, be able to advance the noble mandate of African unity with integrity and with purpose. For the democratic South Africa, few honors have carried greater significance than hosting the Pan-African Parliament. We are deeply honored as a nation, as a country, to be the host of this august body. Being the home of one of the preeminent institutions of Africa's democratic architecture is more than a privilege for South Africa. It is a responsibility and a duty that we carry out with humility. The year 1994 was a momentous year for South Africa, as all of us know. Not just because we won our liberation from the bondage of apartheid oppression and exploitation. It was also the year that we formally returned to the embrace of the African family of nations, a family that had supported us and stood by us during our struggle for freedom. Just weeks after our first democratic election, South Africa was admitted as the 53rd member state of the Organization of African Unity. Having emerged from decades of apartheid isolation to reclaim our place within the community of African nations, we were and we remain determined to honor Africa's solidarity. In June 1994, the 30th Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the OAU in Tunis, our nation's founding father, President Nelson Mandela, challenged the nations of Africa to commit to the continent's rebirth. He said, and I quote, "If freedom was the crown which the fighters of liberation sought to place on the head of Mother Africa, let the upliftment, the happiness, the prosperity, and the comfort of her children be the jewel of that crown." Close quotes. 32 years ago, South Africa embraced the responsibility to work for Africa's upliftment. Our commitment to do so has not wavered. It has not weakened, and in fact, it has strengthened over the years. South Africa has sought to be more than a mere signatory of the instruments of Africa's unity. Since then, South Africa has sought to honor the solidarity Africa showed us during our struggle by contributing to continental peace, integration, development, and institution building. The progress of Africa is in our DNA. You may note, if you care to notice, our national anthem. Our national anthem starts off with saying, we want the Almighty to secure Africa. That's where it starts. That's what South Africa is all about. In the end, towards the end of the national anthem of South Africa, it then talks about South Africa. Meaning that for us, in our DNA as a nation, Africa has great prominence. Africa is not only the mother of the peoples of Africa and South Africa, it is our origin. And that is the commitment that we have to the development of Africa. We have consistently and actively committed our efforts and resources to building the institutions, initiatives, and capabilities our continent needs. In 2002, we were honored to host the inaugural Summit of the African Union here in South Africa, in the KwaZulu-Natal province in Durban. South Africa is a founding member of the African Peer Review Mechanism and was one of the co-architects of the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD. Through our African Renaissance and International Cooperation Fund, South Africa continues to finance democracy support, mediation, humanitarian assistance, reconstruction, and capacity building across our beloved African continent. It is during times of need, at moments of crisis, that African unity is at its most potent and powerful. 6 years ago, our continent was confronted with the worst global health crisis in more than a century. Through the collective efforts of member states, the African Union institutions, and the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention, we coordinated a continental response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We were, as South Africa then, we had been given the responsibility to be chair of the African Union. We worked with others to establish the first Africa medicine supplies platform to procure critical supplies and medical equipment. This was an innovative development where we worked together with all other countries on our continent to procure all these supplies at a much lower rate. We established the Africa African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team to procure millions of vaccines for the continent. As a continental collective, the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic have strengthened our resolve to better coordinate future pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. And today, South Africa has been asked to be the champion of the preparedness and response for future pandemics that could come. Africa demonstrated the value of continental solidarity during the COVID-19 pandemic. We were able to demonstrate that when we work together to confront a crisis, we are able to express unity, to demonstrate our unity and our strength. Through the African Union, virtually an entire continent was brought under a joint continental strategy, coordinated by Africa's own public health agency, the Africa CDC. Our continental response extended beyond the geographic boundaries of our continent, recognizing the African diaspora as the sixth region of Africa. We opened the Africa Medical Supplies Platform and the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust to the countries of the Caribbean community, who we regard as the sons and daughters of Africa. This enabled Caribbean countries to benefit from Africa's pooled procurement of critical medical supplies and vaccines. At a time when vaccine nationalism was taking hold and poorer countries were being pushed to the side and to the back of the queue, Africa did not only call for international solidarity, it showed unity and it moved forward with great determination. Africa practiced solidarity. We extended the institutions and the mechanisms we had built to our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean. This demonstrates that African integration can produce practical benefits not only for our continent, but also for the wider global African family. This resolve is evident in the response to the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Uganda, ably led by the Africa CDC. We commend the affected countries for the decisive action they have taken to contain the Ebola outbreaks and further congratulate this Parliament for dedicating time during this parliamentary session to deliberate on the continental response to this public health emergency. I personally visited the DRC and saw the extent to which the DRC has developed some of the world-class capabilities in dealing with Ebola. They have set up a laboratory of enormous capability and been able to track the development of Ebola and are now in the process even of developing a vaccine. So the DRC is to be really congratulated for showcasing what Africa is capable of, and they need to be applauded for that. South Africa has had the privilege of contributing to peacekeeping and post-conflict reconstruction on our continent through election observers, troop contributions, capacity building and mediation. When the African Union was born right here on South African soil, the people of South Africa stood firmly behind the powerful vision of an African Renaissance. Today, South Africa stands behind the collective effort to translate the vision of continental unity into cooperation, action, and progress. And indeed, it's not only South Africa. It is all the various countries that are represented by yourselves. Your countries stand behind this great vision of the renewal of our continent. And all our countries are really to be applauded for carrying forward this vision. This historical arc, this continuity of purpose, is testament to our enduring commitment to the African agenda. Now, by hosting this Pan-African Parliament and through our humble contribution to African unity, to integration, to peace and security, we affirm our profound conviction that South Africa's future is inseparable from the future of our beloved African continent. The Pan-African Parliament is a pillar of Africa's democratic architecture. As you all sit here, you must know that we all see you as representing that pillar. This Parliament gives expression to the voice of the peoples of Africa. It reinforces our shared commitment to democratic governance, constitutionalism, the rule of law, and the respect for human rights. As elected representatives of our continent and of our people, you have a unique responsibility as members of this Parliament to strengthen accountable institutions, to promote transparency, and to ensure that the aspirations of the African Union are translated into tangible improvements in the lives of the people of Africa. This Parliament must itself exemplify the democratic values that it seeks to advance across the continent. It must be a model of integrity, of transparency, of accountability, and responsible stewardship and fidelity to its own rules. Its strength will depend not only on the powers entrusted to this Parliament, but also on the confidence it inspires among the people of Africa. We welcome the efforts of this Parliament to exercise oversight over the flagship projects of the African Union through its various committees. By bringing various national parliaments together under a single roof, this institution is able to monitor the implementation of policies and programs that are key to Africa's development and integration. So this session takes place under the African Union's theme of the year, assuring sustainable water availability and safe sanitation systems to achieve the goals of Agenda 2063. This theme addresses one of the most urgent challenges facing our continent and its people. Access to clean water and safe sanitation is a fundamental human right. It is a right that is enshrined in our own constitution here in South Africa. It is essential to human dignity, to public health, food security, education, industrial development, and social stability. Yet millions of people across Africa still live without a reliable supply of safe drinking water or adequate sanitation. Women and girls often carry the heaviest burden, traveling long distances to collect water and losing opportunities to learn, to work, and to participate fully in community life. Climate change is intensifying droughts and floods. Aging and poorly maintained infrastructure is failing communities. Pollution, inadequate investment, and weak governance are placing further pressure on scarce water resources in many countries. Water insecurity does not respect national borders. Many of Africa's rivers, lakes, and groundwater systems are shared between countries. Their sustainable management requires cooperation, trust, and a shared commitment to the interests of present and future generations. The Pan-African Parliament and national parliaments have a duty and they have a decisive role to ensure that this resource is properly managed. They must develop and harmonize enabling legislation, oversee public expenditure, promote investment in water infrastructure, and hold governments accountable for delivering reliable water and sanitation services. They must ensure that continental commitments are reflected in national development plans, municipal budgets, and the daily lives of our people. South Africa is on its own confronting its own severe water supply challenges. South Africa is a water-scarce country, and through our National Water Action Plan, we are working to strengthen accountability, to rehabilitate infrastructure, to improve municipal performance and mobilize investment in water security. We recognize that no country can address these challenges in isolation. We must share knowledge. We must also share technology, finance, and expertise across our continent. And we look to the Pan-African Parliament to continue to leverage its mandate in pursuit of peace, good governance, the empowerment of women and young people, climate justice, and other key issues facing our continent. This Parliament must be resolute in defending constitutional democracy. It must speak clearly against unconstitutional changes of government, unlawful extension of political tenure, the weakening of democratic institutions, and the misuse of public resources. This Parliament must defend the independence of legislatures, of our courts, and institutions established to protect democracy. Democratic governance is not an abstract ideal. It is essential for peace, development, and the confidence of the citizens of this continent, particularly confidence in the institutions that are meant to serve them. As a voice of all Africa's peoples, this Pan-African Parliament is a strident voice in support of multilateralism, of international law, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. That voice must be heard loud and clear, coming from this institution. Africa must speak with one voice on the reform of the institutions of global governance and global financial architecture, so that they are more representative, they are more equitable, and responsive to the needs of emerging economies. One of the most significant tasks of this Pan-African Parliament is in this era is to provide guidance to the putting into effect of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The African Continental Free Trade Area is undoubtedly the most powerful instrument we have as a continent to realize our cherished goal of African unity, but more importantly, of African prosperity and progress. If we use this instrument properly, to its greatest effect, this Continental Free Trade Area will overcome the boundaries that colonial division and exploitation impose on our people and our continent. It will open our rivers to commerce and our ports to trade. It is the foundation on which we will build new factories that will employ many of our people to produce goods that are made by African hands on this continent. It will develop new mines. It will plow new fields and build new data centers. This continental free trade area will enable our people to realize their potential and to develop the skills that will drive the global economy of the future. It will allow the men and the women, the women and the youth of this continent to place their energies and capabilities in the service of inclusive growth. But truth be told, agreements alone will not create a continental market. We must remove non-tariff barriers, modernize our customs systems, improve transport and logistics, harmonize regulations, and establish payment systems that will make it a lot easier and less costly for African businesses to trade with one another. The Pan-African Parliament must work with national and regional parliaments to domesticate the African Continental Free Trade Area, commitments to harmonize legislation and to hold governments accountable for implementation. The goal of African integration extends beyond infrastructure, commerce, and trade. African integration imagines a continent where knowledge, where culture, where innovation and ideas flow freely across borders, across rivers, across mountain ranges, and across great plains. It envisages a continent where people are not constrained by strictures placed upon them by lines drawn on a colonial map. And if we are to realize this vision of African unity and integration, we need to collectively attend to the challenges and opportunities that face us. And some of those challenges are challenges of migration, which is a topical issue not only on the African continent, but especially in South Africa as well. Today, many parts of our continent are confronted by the challenge of migration in our own countries and out of our continent to other continents. Here in South Africa, as has been the experience of other countries, we've witnessed outbreaks of anti-migrant sentiment and incidents of intimidation and violence directed at foreign nationals, and incidents that have been quite sad and abhorrent, where people have been injured and some people have died and lost their lives, which we as South Africa deeply, deeply regret and mourn. This is fueled in part by misinformation and prejudice, but it draws on a genuine concern among some South Africans about the social and economic burden that is brought upon them by illegal migration. As the South African government, I want to make it clear, we have taken a firm stance against any form of intimidation, vigilantism, or violence directed at people from other countries or other nations. We've taken a firm stand against hatred for people from other countries, xenophobia or Afrophobia. We have taken steps to strengthen and enforce our laws, to diffuse tension and to ensure that all persons within our borders respect the rights of all, and that the rights of people from outside South Africa are respected and upheld. Migration itself is an essential part of the African story. Throughout history, across every continent, people have moved in search of opportunity or safety, and they will continue to do so. We must not conflate lawful migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers with people who enter or remain in countries in violation of immigration laws. Nor should migrants or people from outside the country be made to be scapegoats for unemployment, crime, or shortcomings in the delivery of public services. Our response must combine firm, fair, and effective immigration management with an unwavering defense of human dignity and the rule of law. Our task is to ensure that migration is managed in a manner that affirms the rights and dignity of all people, that respects international conventions, and that advances social cohesion and the unity of Africans as a whole. And this is where we also say that we need to work together, and we call upon various countries on our continent to work with us to address this challenge. South Africa cannot solve this challenge alone. It needs to work together with its sister countries and with the peoples of our continent to address this problem. We have seen how unmanaged migration can undermine the sovereignty, the security and social order of countries, not only South Africa, but many other countries. As African countries, we have to acknowledge and address the conditions that drive migration in the first place. We need to work together, as I said, to address issues like conflict, instability, governance failures, poverty, and social discord. We need to create equal economic opportunities across the African continent. We also need to silence the guns, which is a very clear and firm position that has been taken by the African Union. We need to build inclusive institutions of governance. We must work for a future where Africans are able to migrate out of choice and not necessity. And we call on this Pan-African Parliament to take up the mantle of leadership, to be at the forefront of finding sustainable solutions to this issue. When I met the members of the Bureau before coming to this open session, they said, "Mr. President, will you articulate what this Parliament should do in addition to what it is called upon to do?" And it is this. This is this issue of migration that this Parliament must give leadership to. This Parliament must address this issue in a way that brings us all together, to work together. The measure of Africa's development will not only be the ease with which Africans can move across borders. It will also be the extent to which every African country offers all its citizens sufficient opportunity, dignity, and hope. As the honorable members of this Parliament, as the collective leadership of this continent, we have a responsibility to build a better Africa. It cannot and should not be the responsibility of the heads of state or certain countries only. It must be a collective responsibility, and all of us who are seated here are leaders, and that is why we were elected and chosen to come and represent our peoples of Africa. We have a responsibility to build a continent that is at peace with itself, where conflicts are resolved through dialogue and diplomacy, rather than through the barrel of a gun. It is a continent that produces everything that it needs. This is what this continent must be. That extracts from its abundant resources the full value that belongs to the peoples of Africa. Rather than exporting our raw wealth, we must process our minerals, our agricultural produce, and our energy ourselves. We are building a continent where our young people have the skills, and they are continuously demonstrating that they have the knowledge and the skills. We must also build a continent where capital and opportunity is there to build enterprises and careers on African soil rather than seeking them abroad. This is a continent where women should take their rightful place in the boardrooms, in the parliaments, in the cabinets of our various countries. And they must take their place not in the home only, but in the factories, in the various institutions that lead this continent. This continent must be a continent whose voice in global institutions matches its size, its history, and its potential. Long must be the days when Africa is always pushed to the back. Africa belongs to the front. We must lead the global events that are unfolding, because we are, as Africa, the origins of humanity. Humanity originates from this continent. We must therefore take our place in global matters. And to do so, we must have a common voice, one voice that is powerful and resolute on the reform of the United Nations Security Council, on the international financial architecture, and in the councils that set the rules of trade, climate, and technology. Now, to build this Africa, we must translate the agreements we have signed into the laws, institutions, and resources that give life to these agreements. But this Parliament must also be given the legislative powers that it requires. Now, yes, the Malabo Protocol was passed. It has not yet been ratified by many countries. And I will call upon my own country and many other countries to ratify this protocol, so that you must not be members of a toy telephone. You must be a parliament that really delivers, a parliament that regulates, that seeks to regulate the various continental matters that affect the peoples of Africa. And of course, many people fear that you will replace their own national parliaments, and I don't believe so. You should be able to function as the parliament of our continent in consultation and in cooperation and collaboration with our national parliaments. Too many of our continental commitments remain aspirations on paper. We must invest in our people, in education, in health and skills, so that our demographic strength, and it is a huge strength, of 1.5 billion people going to rise to a much bigger number. And this strength must become a dividend and not a burden. We must connect our continent with the roads, with railways, with ports, energy grids, and digital infrastructure that allow goods, capital, data, and people to move freely. We must strengthen the institutions of this union, of our African Union, so that they have the authority and resources and political support to act on matters of peace, security, health, and development and trade. And we must remain united. Africa's story teaches us that division has long been the instrument through which others have sought to shape our destiny. A united Africa shapes its own destiny. The success of this 7th legislature, this 7th parliament, will not be measured only by the debates that you hold or the resolutions that you will adopt. It will be measured by the laws that it helps to shape, the commitments it helps to implement, and the difference it makes in the daily lives of the people of Africa. History will judge us not by the speeches that we deliver, but by the Africa we build. Yes, that is so. So let this parliament be the conscience of our continent. Let it be the voice of Africa's most vulnerable. Let it be the guardian of democracy, and let it be the champion of peace. But let it be the great reservoir of enabling the young people of our continent, the women of our continent, to take their place in development matters and in matters of progress. So this parliament, therefore, has a great responsibility. And let me say, we are there to work with you, to support you, and to enable you to execute your tasks. Mr. President and Vice Presidents, I thank you for giving me this opportunity. At last, I've now been allowed to come here. So thank you very much.